Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jackie Green. I'm one of the nurses that works at Young Minds Matter. I'm also part of the School Links team, and some of our role that we do is to deliver training, and we do that with professionals and for children and young people. So today we're trying to sort of keep an online element of our training. So we're going to cover low mood and depression. The session lasts for about an hour. There is a pre and post measure that helps us to know if the training has been of some value. So hopefully at the beginning of the session you can complete that pre bit, and afterwards the post. That would be really great. Maybe a good idea to have a pen and paper handy, and you might want to also be pausing the video. There is opportunity for discussion, maybe some question and answer. If you would like to contact the School Links team and send those questions to us, that would be absolutely great, and we'll do our very best to answer them. So the session today is going to be low mood and depression. The aims of our session, that's trying to understand the difference between the terms, and we do tend to sort of use them interchangeably. So if we're really clear about those differences, I think that also helps in terms of how we're explaining and teaching others about that. To understand the experiences faced by children and young people with depression, to know the signs of depression for our children and young people, to help us know what we're looking for and how, in terms of what we need to respond to. And just bearing in mind, particularly because we are really keen for that early intervention to happen, so the sooner we can notice something that's changed or different, the sooner we can put in some support at the right level. And also to know how to help our children and young people who may be experiencing depression. So it is quite a practical session, so hopefully there will be some ideas that you can utilise in your interactions with your children and young people. So this is an opportunity you might want to pause the video and have a think about the differences between low mood and depression. So what we have is a simple table just to kind of illustrate. There are some similarities, but also just to be clear, when we're talking about low mood, there is an element, that we all experience that, and that's quite normal. Low mood can include those same feelings that we might associate with depression, like sadness, and bigger feelings that our children and young people may well be describing, the worry and the anger that goes with that. There's also experiences as far as low mood goes that there's a short period of time. It's often kind of responding to an event. The classic example that we use is maybe your favourite football team might have lost the final of or a match, and you suddenly find yourself sort of feeling that change in your mood or the changes in your emotion. But what we do sort of also explain with a period of low mood, it's quite short-lived, and often that mood will lift after that event has gone. So often feelings can go after the experience has passed. For example, the football team that's lost. So once you're recovered and on Monday morning, you might just be feeling a little bit better. But with depression, we know that the experience of that change in mood lasts for much, much longer. So on our table, we're thinking maybe 2 weeks and above. So if you're thinking about noticing changes with your child or young person, you may be looking or asking or trying to find out how long symptoms have been going on for and how long that person's noticed those changes. And that's persistent changes. That's not the kind of come and going of, that's a persistent change. And depression can impact on a child or young person's functioning aspects of their daily life, what they're able to do, what they feel motivated to do, interested to do, their sleep patterns, maybe their eating patterns, how much they can concentrate, whether they're still engaging in the activities that they would normally do and find interesting, or whether that has changed in some way and is starting to interfere with their quality of life. And so those things can really be good indicators, particularly if we're looking at that over a longer period of time. Just to sort of explain as well, the depression includes feelings of low mood, but other physiological and behavioural symptoms, which is why I'm mentioning the sleep and the appetite. We sometimes find with depression, the appetite can increase, but it also can decrease. And there can be some physical kind of changes. Our children probably will tell us about their physical feelings before they will tell us about their emotional side of things. So they may well notice that they're having more aches and pains, or they just maybe don't have the same energy. They may be just not really feeling that they're bothered to do things. And those can be helpful clues, particularly if they're persistent over time. So this is just a quick activity, and this is really for anyone that's watching as a team, or maybe just think about it individually. When we think about the types of things that can happen when we're experiencing, low mood or something that might be moving into a depression, you're in town, you walk past a really good friend who would normally talk to you, would normally be interested in how you are, and you kind of say hello and you just gesture that you'd maybe engage a bit of a conversation, and they walk straight past. So now's a chance to think about, and you might want to pause the video around what sorts of things might be suddenly going through your mind, what assumptions, what judgments, what kinds of thoughts and feelings might you be having if you've just felt that different response, or just noticed that different response. How would you be interpreting that? What would be your immediate reaction? So think about that in terms of thoughts, feelings, and how you might react to it, behave. So what we would talk about if we're thinking about the sorts of things that can keep us in a low mood and lead us into a state of depression, when we have an experience, say for example the person that we might perceive as ignoring us or not wanting to engage, we might have an instant reaction, a negative thinking style that might come in, and that response can be something that can be really quite impactful on how we feel, how we interpret, and how we go on interpreting certain things, and that the impact of those experiences can be quite negative. For example, we may jump to conclusions. These are the sorts of unhelpful thinking styles that we talk about with our children and young people in lots of our work that we do to help our children and young people recognise them, and start to understand how these can impact on our mood and on our behaviour, and how we feel and respond to certain experiences in life. So if we're jumping to a conclusion, that conclusion might be that person doesn't like us anymore, doesn't want to be friends maybe, if we're seeing it through a very negative lens. We may take that very personally. So we personalise something. If you're in a negative frame of mind, you may well blame yourself. You may well think, gosh, I've done something wrong, I've offended them, I've said something, I might not have responded to something they've put on Facebook, and suddenly they're not interested in talking to us. So you may well feel quite vulnerable in that way. You may well feel, oh my goodness, something's wrong with me, or I'm judging myself in a very negative way and blaming myself for that reaction. So something quite small for somebody who's going through these unhelpful thinking styles can turn into something really quite big and quite difficult to manage. So just one more example, and you can have a look at the other ones at your leisure, but for the purpose of this teaching video, for example, disqualifying the positives. So you're just probably, again, seeing something in a very negative way, discounting the good things that have happened or that you have done for someone or another. You could discount all the times that you've got on and had a great time with that person, but that one negative response, then you might just assume suddenly that friendship or relationship, certainly from our children and point of view, has suddenly changed. And catastrophizing, that one thing amounts into something dreadful and can be the end of the world. I would probably admit that I'm recognise quite a few of those myself, and depending on any situation, and you yourselves might also be thinking, yeah, I've certainly done some catastrophizing and jumping to conclusions. So we all do them. They're very common, but they are very key if we're thinking about low mood and depression, and certainly what keeps that going, and what can then lead us into a more sustained low mood, and something that we would then be saying, yeah, maybe there's someone who's experiencing depression. And this is what we tend to work with as well if we're trying to change that and turn that into a more positive mood or state of mind. So we're thinking about the depression cycle. And we work with a therapy called CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy. So we tend to be very quick in explaining to our children and young people about the CBT circle. And that's very much that relationship between thoughts, feelings and behaviours. And the negative cycles, the negative traps, if you like, that can happen. Very much if you think about when we've just been talking about negative thoughts. So instantly, if you have that reaction to a particular event, like someone who you might be thinking has ignored you, doesn't want to speak to you, isn't your friend anymore, that negative focus, like gloomy, self-critical, I've messed up again, so you might have personalised it, what have I said, I've done something wrong, there's no point. They're not friends of mine, no one likes me. One person ignores you, suddenly that thought can be really powerful, really strong. So we have that connected feeling that happens. So the thought has an impact on how we feel. So the depressed feeling tired, no energy, no motivation, not interested, slowed down. Certainly those are very prevalent symptoms when we are thinking about depression. So behaviours, we may see changes in behaviours. We may feel that we want to cut ourselves off from others. We don't want that rejection or that feeling of disappointment again. We may start to really withdraw and isolate from our usual peer groups or activities, choosing to stay at home, choosing to stay in our bed, a child or a young person choosing to stay in their bedroom, just not going out and not doing as much. So there might be different things happening in those three key areas. And those three key areas are definitely the ones we would be very interested in when we're exploring CBT circle, and we're looking for the relationship between the thoughts, feelings and behaviours and the changes. But there are also those three key areas that we can start to talk about and think about with our children and young people, particularly if we want to sort of try and make some changes in any one or all of those areas. So children and young people and their experiences that may lead them into a state of depression. And there's lots of them, and just at a glance at this slide, I'm sure from a professional's point of view we can think of maybe even more, and there's certainly not an exhaustive list. And we recognise our children and young people have a whole series of experiences, events that can be very challenging, that can be very destructive in terms of the mood that they may have, and the thoughts, feelings and behaviours that might be affected by these types of experiences. So I'm not going to go into too much detail for the purpose of this video, but just for example, we do have children who might experience a traumatic life episode or a traumatic series of events, and how that can then impact on somebody's self-confidence or self-esteem, or how they might perceive other people around them, and whether they can trust them or whether they feel that they belong. So there's has a lot of different negative impacts. Academic issues, we certainly see lots of different referrals or questions about when there are exams or tests coming up that can sort of start to put additional pressures, and somebody, a child or young person, may feel that they can't match those expectations. They may feel suddenly particularly stressed, particularly worried, and particularly doubtful about whether they can achieve the sorts of grades, the sorts of expectations that are upon them. So that one particular experience, the academic side, can really start to trigger some quite negative thoughts about I'm going to fail, and that then maybe, for example, could trigger that real negative feeling and the sort of I can't be bothered and what's the point. So we see that connection right the way through, and behavioural wise they may start to withdraw or maybe not start to attend those lessons or having time off school. So the negative cycle, the negative trap, and that negative CBT circle can start to happen. So I'm just using that as an example, but there's a whole range of different experiences there. that do potentially have that impact on a child in terms of their mood. So this is another opportunity if you would want to pause the video. You can have a discussion, or you can jot some ideas down yourself, or send some just around what you think would be the emotional and behavioural signs of depression, particularly if you're thinking about the changes that you might notice. And we have just sort of spoken about the CBT circle, the thoughts, feelings and behaviours. So that might sort of give you some helpful clues on what you might notice. So you can pause it, have a think about that. So we would suggest these are things that we often see either in assessments or certainly through a treatment pathway when we're thinking about depression and the associated emotional signs that go with it. We very much hear about being continually worried or anxious about something. It can be quite invasive, quite persistent. Don't forget that when we're talking about depression, that's the longer term impact on a daily basis in all areas. It can impact at home and at school and out with friends. It can be quite persistent, feeling quite irritable, restless and agitated. And that might be something you might notice that's different, particularly from how a child would normally present. Feeling overwhelmed and guilty and worthless, they're very much things that we would notice or be told about. A sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Feeling quite empty and emotionally numb and unable to relate to anyone. I mean, these types of things can be difficult for a young person if they've got vulnerabilities and sensitivities around these emotional difficulties. They can start to quickly feel quite different, particularly from their peers or their family, and very isolated, and quickly those types of things can escalate. We do sort of have descriptions of feeling quite hopeless and helpless when you've lost interest or motivation or drive to do those things, or a sense that you can do it, you lose faith in yourself very quickly. So very sort of a negative frame of mind impacting on how they emotionally feel. So behavioural signs. We have withdrawn from relationships, and that's really common. And these are very much the sort of common themes that we see throughout, like I say, about the assessment or the work that we do. Over-dependence. If you're feeling quite vulnerable and quite scared or quite unable to do things by yourself, you can feel quite over-dependent. Other people helping you and supporting you. A loss of energy, we certainly find that. We might even notice that. And these are quite interesting if we start to think of the individuals that we know or people that we may already have met who present in this way. Aches and pains, as we said, sometimes they can be more easy and more kind of available, if you like, to talk about. Or certainly if you imagine our children and young people trying to find the words to describe their emotions, often that behaviour or that physical side can be much easier to explain or to identify. Limited level of concentration, lack of self-care. We have sort of impacts on poor memory, and there is an interesting video that you are invited to have a look at that explains the physical changes, the things that can happening to the brain itself, and definitely that's something that's supporting our understanding of things like depression, when we have more and more evidence to really explain those changes on a biological level. So we have changes in appetite, as we've said, and sometimes the child may come and look very not very. Maybe they've been sleeping a lot, but they don't look refreshed, or they don't feel refreshed, and they certainly don't behave that they're refreshed, and they might still be looking quite tired and quite withdrawn. So yeah, changes in sleep, reckless behaviours. We might see that. If a child's feeling quite hopeless or quite helpless, they might not be in that place where they're taking as much care of themselves or bother to take as much care of themselves as possible. We do sometimes, and then self-harming behaviours can be an indicator of changes in mood, and they might over time be in a position where they may be having suicidal thoughts, particularly if they feel that sense of being trapped or hopeless, or that they don't think things will change and they want something to change and they haven't really in a position to explain what that distress feels like. So sometimes the suicidal thoughts can be an expression of that distress, or they might be, again, around something more serious. There might be an intent there. So it's just about sort of having those conversations. We do have a training session on suicidal ideation, which might be helpful to look at that in more detail. So this slide offers the opportunity to access a video which really kind of illustrates an experience of depression from a teenage point of view. So there will be a link that you can access to use that. So have a look. I think, again, these are really useful, short 5-minute videos that give an insight into that experience, may generate some conversation between yourselves as a team, or even if you were to share that with one of your, a young person that you might be working with. Again, there's a short sort of poem that goes with that video, so I will allow you to read that at your leisure. We would definitely be showing the video if we were working face to face, so I'd recommend that you access that and have a look. So we're moving on to what we think we can do to help. So we're thinking about how we help our children and young people. At this point, give it some thought. Maybe, shut the video off and think about what you already do, because what we are very much about is working with ourselves as a resource and thinking about what we do and sort of adding into that. And I'm sure if you were to do that as a team, there would be definitely things that you already do that are helpful. We've got some additional ideas and things, just prompts, things that you can do. So supporting a child or young person to trust that they can talk to you if they are feeling low or depressed. And I think, as obvious as that sounds, it is having that awareness, that real kind of communication, that's okay. That kind of environment where it is okay to talk about your feelings and to identify those particularly when they're negative, or they become overwhelming, or they become very challenging. So you're able to find that space and have that place to be heard and validated, and to just think that through and identify, and maybe even think about those negative thoughts, feelings and behaviours, and just raising that self-awareness and identifying when things are becoming more challenging and really sort of perpetuating a low and difficult mood. Listen to their own individual experience. And that's, again, maybe sounds something that I know we can do, but it's really quite validating, isn't it? And really important to be that active listener. So that young person, that child, can just tell you what that individual experience is. Because I think we can use words like depression, or we could use words like low mood, but really we don't know what that means for that individual. And just by using those terms doesn't necessarily tell us a great deal about what's happening with that young person or with that child, and what it is that's individual about their experience. So I think that'd be really interesting to get that story. Offer help, but don't react negatively if they don't accept this straight away. If we think about how difficult maybe it is to trust, or to feel the motivation to engage, or to even see that there's a reason for that. We might notice some changes, but sometimes the interaction or the engagement, it takes time, and these things might not just be an overnight success. And I think we need to be careful. Don't blame ourselves. It's quite common for that. It can take some time to really kind of get that message through, and so that child or young person feels able to engage with that support. So we're about being kind of encouraging and patient with our children and young people, which is not always an easy thing to do. Particularly if we're really confident that something needs to change or needs to happen. We do need that young person or child to be in a place where they feel they can engage. Assess self-harm and suicidal thoughts and other risks. I think that's very important, just because we are talking about low mood and depression, and we have recognised that when a young person or a child is depressed, their negative thoughts and feelings can be quite overwhelming. They can be experiencing thoughts about harming themselves, or suicidal thoughts, or feeling quite hopeless and helpless. So it's really important just to check in, and it engages us where they are in terms of risk and helps us manage that, and will tell us if, maybe if we need a little bit of support ourselves and help to really kind of think through what that management plan and that support can look like. So again, we're just working with our children and young people and educating them about the difference between low mood and depression. Because I've certainly spoken to quite a number of children and young people who tell me that they're depressed. We're getting into a conversation and we're finding out, actually there's a difference. It might not have been going on that long. There might be other things they're able to do. It might just be mood that changes in a particular place over a particular issue. So, we really work hard at knowing the difference between the low mood and depression, because when we're in a low mood, it's a different type of approach, a different type of work, and that's a good thing. We aren't wanting to mislabel these things. And I think with a bit, already I think we could probably do that in a quite a clear way and help that young person understand what's happening to them in a much more clear way as well. Support that child or young person to understand how their thinking patterns and behaviours could be maintaining a feeling of depression. We've thought about, if you persistently and habitually think about things or have a negative lens and looking at things, interpreting things in a very negative way, we think about our CBT circle. So we had a little exercise earlier with the triggering event, which was the friend walking past us in town and what we perceived as being ignored. So we had that thought or that kind of, oh my goodness, that person has ignored me, that person doesn't like me, that person isn't my friend anymore. So we had those difficult emotions coming through. And maybe, that uncomfortable, difficult physical response and the behaviours that go with that, which might be just to withdraw from that friend or kind of withdraw from the circle of friends, as you might not think that anyone likes you anymore or that you're any fun to be around. So we've really kind of explored that connection and that relationship between our thoughts, feelings and our behaviours, and how our events in life, how they do intend and can trigger that knock-on effect, and how we need to sort of think about intervening and talking about and learning about what thoughts, feelings and behaviours are going on, so we can sort of try and look at changing or challenging that. And to help with challenging unhelpful thoughts, we've got, an example of how you could work through with a child or young person and supporting them in balancing their negative thoughts. And there's kind of a step-by-step, and there's lots of different examples that you can use. You might be creative and make even one yourself with the child or young person that you're working with. I know we certainly work with a variety of different tools, but if we go through this just briefly together, just to give us some idea of the sorts of things you can do, when you're trying to challenge and support that young person in balancing. We say balancing because we don't want, I'm amazing and has something that they can't believe in. It's just something that's a little bit more realistic. So when you have what is the negative thought or prediction, so what happened, say the event that's gone on, we use our experience in town. So you could just ask that question, it could be that. What is your evidence for this negative thought or prediction? So the evidence that we had in town was they just walked straight past me, totally blanked me, didn't want to know. What is your evidence against a negative thought or prediction? So that could be such a good friend. Usually they would say hi and be really, engaged with what you're doing and want to spend some time with you. So they may well have had maybe something on their own mind. They might not have seen you. There might be other reasons other than that really quick, sharp, negative prediction assumption that you might have made if you're in that negative frame of mind. Is the negative thought or prediction valid? So, if we're asked that question, it's amazing, particularly when we put it down in black and white on a piece of paper and really see how much our negative thoughts can be impacting on the way that we're responding to a situation. And what is your balanced thought? What could be a different way, of looking at that same scenario? And like I was just saying there, it could be, they had something on their mind, they didn't see us, they've got a lot going on, it's a busy day, maybe they needed to be somewhere and we just sort of focus on on that, which takes that self-blame and takes that negativity away from yourself. So it's just a way of working through and asking some really helpful questions just to sort of raise that awareness of those negative thoughts and realising they can impact how you feel, and challenging those in a constructive and supportive way so you can come up with something different at the end of that exercise. And we do this routinely with our children and young people when we're doing some CBT work as well. Consider the child or young person's network to help him or her. Do you know all that sort of social network that they have? You know, the importance of positive people, the importance of doing positive things with other people, and how that can then shift how we feel. So really get to know from that child or young person's point of view what that network looks like and the opportunities for that child or young person to be around those people and what they can be doing together. Support that child or young person to keep connected with others. You know, we really know and recognise that connection is so important for our emotional well-being. And particularly because depression can really impact on how disconnected we can feel, because we stop sometimes doing what we enjoy and we don't feel that motivation to do that, and we can feel that we're not really part of things. So really building up very, sometimes gently in maybe a graded way, you know, sort of step by step on building that connection and activities that we can do. We use something called behavioural activation, which is all about looking at the activities that they feel they can take on gradually to sort of increase that time spent doing enjoyable things that really are going to have a positive impact on their mood and their behaviours and hopefully how they think and feel. Enable that child or young person to identify their aspirations, really kind of give that sense of hope. You know, if you feel hopeless, you really maybe haven't focused or forgotten about the aspirations, you haven't spent that time thinking them through. So having that opportunity can also be a really powerful way of shifting that emotional state. Provide structure and practical support. Because if you're in a place where it's difficult to think things through, difficult to problem solve, difficult to find the energy to go through stage by stage the different things that can help you, having that practical support. It might be just, you know, a lift to go to the football club, you know, a kind of an opportunity to sit down and problem solve, put some structure, like a weekly planner. I certainly do that with the children that I see. We often is very much starting with a structure and what practical things can help them to engage with activities and connection with others. So that sounds really obvious and really simple, but it's also really helpful. Thinking about the stress management, so there's lots of different tools out there. In terms, we've got a good example here around some breathing exercises. At the end of this session, there are some references just to give you other avenues to use when you're sort of looking at different techniques and tools. Looking at anxiety management skills. Breathing exercises. Breathing is one of the best ways, I think, in terms of certainly regulating and calming emotions down, or particularly if you're starting to feel overwhelmed. Guided relaxation, there are a number of different examples out there for teenagers and for very young children as well. Really positive tools to use if we're trying to shift how we feel into a calmer, more positive state. And positive affirmations, so positive statements in the here and now. I can do this, I have got this, I am coping, lots of things, particularly if you write your own, you know, if you work with that child, if they can think of something, even just one thing, they can positively affirm about themselves, what they do, something really solid about their achievements, or something positive about their current activities that they're doing, and about their abilities. And these have a very profound and powerful impact on the way that we feel and what we think and how we might perceive ourselves. So support a child or young person to gradually increase their activities. Kind of reflects what we were saying around connection, doing more enjoyable things, finding that to-do list together, of what you can do, maybe doing that in that graded fashion, really starting with the things that might be, it might be, you know, coming out of your room and doing stuff at home, but then going out to the shops or spending, you know, more time with friends. So it is making that achievable, but certainly activity, and there's lots of examples, lots of evidence that shows that activity is really powerful for improving mood, because it increases the feel-good chemicals, the serotonin, for example, just to really boost us. Very helpful. Same for this increasing exercise. Again, just one of those areas that we might miss, but if we can really support the knowledge and awareness of how beneficial it is for improving mood, then, you know, again, it really brings that kind of reason for doing it much more into focus when we really are caring about that emotional well-being of our children and young people. Sleep hygiene, really important, has a huge impact if we're not sleeping well. So various, you know, the things that can help with that have a huge beneficial impact on someone's mood and the food that they eat. You know, we know that having too much caffeine or sugar can have a huge impact in terms of mood and emotional well-being. So being aware of what that dietary intake looks like and the sorts of changes that are possible for those individual children, that's always really worth doing as part of that plan of action, as part of that support. So we're looking at the whole child and from their, you know, physical health and their connection with that and their emotional well-being. Just to help with that conversation, we've got some examples here. My Needs an Instructional Guide, and this sort of maybe just helps us talk things through when we're looking at a plan of action from a child or young person's point of view, to help them tell us when I would like your help. There is a lot, if we think about how vulnerable or you know, difficult it can be to actually access or accept, or being you know, in a place where you're ready to engage with help. Just gives us a bit of a guide. So I'm just going to kind of, when I would like your help, when you notice, and there's some sort of ticked areas here about when I'm sleeping too much, I'm not sleeping enough, when I'm self-isolating, when I have mood swings or I start talking negatively. Really helpful areas, because if that's the point when they think, actually, this is where I'd like you to help me maybe challenge my negative thoughts or help me with my sleep pattern, again, they're really, for me, that's really helpful to know, oh, that's the point when I can start to interject with some ideas, or we can sit down and have a conversation. How you can help me. For somebody who wants to help that person, having some guidance with that. And on here we've, you know, sort of various things, being patient with me, listening without interrupting me, check in with me daily. You know, simple check-ins can be really effective. Trust I am trying, giving me personal space when I ask for it. All these things, just really helpful tips. Again, little pointers, and it maybe will help with additional conversations and additional ideas. So it's kind of more like a prompting thing for me, these, rather than just, although some of these ideas may fit with the person you're working with. I think if you use it as prompts, it'll be really helpful too. So the things that we need to hear, so if our child, they say, what do I need to hear? And those again are quite positive sort of statements that would be really helpful. You know, I care about you, you are safe, you'll be okay, I am here for you. Those are quite, you know, things that are very grounding, very containing, and they really support building trust and building that communication between you. So if that person really needs to hear that, that's really helpful. And we're saying things that are meaningful and purposeful for that individual. And that's really what we need to be doing. So again, we're on the flip side of that, and we need to know what doesn't help me. And again, we could work with that young person and they could give us those pointers. So not coming back saying, checking on me when we've said we will. You know, these things in terms of building, we want to build that trust. Giving advice without asking me. So, you know, these are sort of quite good examples and helpful, because we need to know probably what not to do, as well as know what we need to be doing. how I will ask for help. So that's, again, something that might help us in our support for that other person. So we know what it looks like. We know what that child or young person will be doing when they're asking for help from us. And I think that autonomy and that control, I think, will be really helpful as well. So that child might, we've got a couple of examples just to share with you. I will call you. I may stop talking. I will visit you. I will ask. How will you know my needs are met? So, I think that's kind of helpful to know, isn't it, when things are changing in a more positive direction. So these are the things that child or young person, will know, and you will know, things that have changed, demonstrating some improvements. So I will be more sociable, I will be sleeping fine, my moods will be stable. So just to sort of share that with each other and those clues that things have changed. So just, again, an instructional guide, and hopefully that will help with those interventions. So the last activity is probably an opportunity for you to pause the video, think through the different strategies, the different things that we've talked about, the way that you might be able to have that conversation with Francis and the example that's given, and think about what support would benefit Francis and his mum, and how could you help Francis. So I think that's kind of you guys using what we've talked about and what we've said, and the ideas you probably already have and the ways that you work, and consolidating all of that and using an example, maybe Francis, or even maybe a case example of your own that you've experienced. I think the best practice ideas are always really helpful learning tools that knit together, particularly if we want to share that, or if you have any questions and you have some ideas and you would like to discuss that together, then we'd be more than happy to answer those questions as well and have that discussion. So, just some advice just to run through. Take care of yourself. This can be a time-consuming and quite energy, sort of a lot of energy going into helping. So we don't want to be sort of alone with that. We want some support, talking to others. Be patient and be kind to yourself when supporting a child or young person with depression. Chances are you are doing your very best. And as we were saying, it's not always straightforward. Because they might not be ready for support. So just, remember that you are doing your best. Consider how your service and educational settings can keep your child or young person mentally and emotionally healthy. So all those different opportunities that you might have, and time and people available to be thinking about and talking about thoughts, feelings and behaviours, and working through some of those strategies that we've spoken about. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking part in the video. We've got our Young Minds Matter number, and we've got the number for the inbox for our duty as well. So yes, hopefully you are able to complete your post form, because we would be really interested to find out if this session has been helpful. So thank you very much, and goodbye.